The Malampaya Deepwater Gas Project is one of the largest industrial endeavor in our country's history. It is a joint undertaking of the national government, who governs the state's indigenous resources, and the private sector, who has the machineries and the technology for extraction. 3 corporations are contracted for this venture: the Chevron Malampaya LLC with 45%, Shell Philippines Exploration with another 45%, and PNOC Exploration Corporation with 10%, under the Service Contract Number 38. The exploration started in 1990 under former President Corazon Aquino's administration, and Fidel Ramos signed it officially as a commercial venture in 1998. The Malampaya project reduced our country's need to import oil. It gave us a stable source of supply of energy. It met 45% of Luzon's energy requirements. But when you search about the Malampaya, the headlines look like this. Amid scandal, the whole citizenry has one question: where did the money go? The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative could shed light to this dilemma.
The EITI, as introduced in the first video, is a platform for the government, extractive corporations, and civil society organizations involved to release reports in the general inflows and outflows of their money. The EITI follows this money from the moment it leaves the accounts of the corporations in the form of royalties or tax, as it is collected by the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and as it goes to the Bureau of Treasury. The first step: preparation and finalization of templates. This is the part where we have to know who our stakeholders are, which agencies can we get the data from, and what kind of data do we need. To do this, we first need to understand how the revenue system behind the Malampaya operation works. And here's what we have gathered. 70% of the gross proceeds from the sale would go to the contractors to recover investment costs. The remaining 30%, the net profit, is shared by the government and the corporation on a 60-40 basis. That means that 18% of the net revenue goes to the government in form of tax. As the law mandates, all oil and gas extraction operations are overseen by the Department of Energy, from the application and signing of contracts to collecting and receiving taxes. The DOE manually manages all of these, but with the assistance of the Bureau of Internal Revenues. All of the accounted money goes to the Bureau of Treasury, ready for allocation. But it gets a little bit more complicated because PNOC, one of the corporate contractor, is a government-owned shareholder, which means that aside from the tax we get, we have another 10% share in the gross revenue. Okay, so with that, we know that we will rely on the reports of the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. We will take a look at the corporate tax collected by BIR and the tax term as revenue stream from the DOE. Okay, so for this part, we have to understand how exactly the money moves from the accounts of the corporations onto the DOE and the BIR, and how both of these government agencies transfer the money onto the National Treasury. So, the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy collects data and money quarterly. The checks collected will be immediately remitted to the Bureau of Treasury by the department's Treasury Division within the day of collection or the following day, following the process below. So each corporation has to pay reports and give the government's share on a quarter basis. The DOE would either transfer to the nearest DOE regional office or directly to the DOE main office. They would then transfer the reports to their compliance division to get the reports validated or its accuracy is checked before it gets transferred to the Treasury Division. The Treasury Division then remits it to the Bureau of Treasury within the day it was received. The Department of Energy accounts the revenues manually using traditional ledgers and yellow sheets. So, for the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the Bureau of Internal Revenue collects quarterly but adjustable to an annual basis. Tax returns are filed through Electronic Filing and Payment System (EFPS) and paid through accredited agent banks like Land Bank and Development Bank of the Philippines. The cash received by these banks are then transferred to the Bureau of Treasury, and the cash received directly by the counter of BIR are passed on to the Central Bank of the Philippines. So, the receiver of the taxes paid in the BIR are either the Bureau of Treasury or the Central Bank of the Philippines. For the oil and gas industry, in this case, it's the Bureau of Treasury that handles everything. Okay, so with that, we will rely on the reports of the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Internal Revenue and the accounts of each corporations for the year 2014. We will take a look at the corporate tax collected by the BIR and the tax term as revenue stream from the DOE. For the third step, reconciliation, this step essentially reviews the report of the stakeholders, both the agencies and the corporations, to see if there are any discrepancies or any missing accounts or money between the payment and the remittance. So now we will take a look at the data of the two agencies and the corporations from 2014. So this is how EITI presented the data of BIR. The per company refers to the amount the company reported to have allotted and released as corporate tax, while the per agency row refers to the amount of the money the agency actually received. So as you can see, for Chevron Malampaya, there is a missing 21,181,137 pesos between the transfer between the corporation and the agency. The same case is with the PNOC, with the missing 4,698,599, and this may seem minuscule to the billions, but these are still huge sums of money, alright? So, the point of reconciliation is that when the EITI noticed that the accounts of the corporations and the government agencies does not reconcile, the initiative communicates with the two of them, setting down a platform for the two to reconcile, not to help them conspire, but to help them figure out what are the possible reasons why their accounts did not balance out. So, for the case of Chevron and PNOC, the missing 4 million and 21 million was indeed released by the corporations. This amount of money was indeed deducted from their profit. It was not, however, received by the BIR in cash form. It may be in the form of a corporate social responsibility or royalty tax, which, since the post-reconciliation variance row, as you can see, is empty, it means that the BIR decided to account their CSR expenditure with their corporate tax. So, in total, the government received 6,140,053,188 in cash from Chevron. The same goes with PNOC. So while Malampaya is not the only site these corporations operate in, it remains to be their largest investment and venture of the three corporations. So to let you see what the corporate income tax of the three corporations involved in the Malampaya look like relative to other gas and oil operations in other parts of the country, here's what it looks like. So this is what the oil and gas operations corporate tax look like relative to other sectors in the extractive industries in billions. So the oil and gas industries makes up for 87% of the corporate tax the Bureau of Internal Revenue acquires from the entire extractive sector, making the oil and gas industry the most productive. With the same template with BIR, this is how the EITI presents the report of the corporations and the DOE. So we assume that the reason why it says subtotal is because Chevron is not accounted here. So you can see Chevron among these companies. So there were no explanation in the reconciliation report that would explain why Chevron is not here. But since EITI remarked that Chevron submitted its requirements on time, we assume that DOE may not have met EITI's deadline because of its manual ledger system. The sum of 46,172,432,000 from the corporate tax and the 28,669,076,684 that the DOE collected is the sum of what the government acquired from the three corporations involved in the Malampaya operation in 2014. That is 74,841,508,684 pesos. That is just a rough 60% of the net revenue, not including the stocks of PNOC that accounts for the 10% of the gross revenue. This money, as the Step 2 has established, goes to the Bureau of Treasury. The question now is, how is it allocated? The local government code sets the share of the bounded local government unit at 40% of the gross proceeds. The 40% of the 18%, of course. So Palawan is set to receive $4 billion in the withstanding 20-year operation of Malampaya. And Palawan did receive its fair share. The palace, however, insists that the Malampaya is actually not within the 15 kilometers municipal waters of Palawan, which means that Palawan is not entitled to any of the Malampaya revenues. But here's the thing. The presidential decree signed by Marcos says this: all fees, services, and receipts from any or all sources, including receipts from service contracts and agreements collected by the Department of Energy, shall form part of a special fund to be used to finance energy, resource development, and exploration programs and projects of the government, and for such and other purposes as may be directed by the President. Legislators themselves have commented on the vagueness of this decree. DOE said itself that there is a need to firmly establish how the Malampaya Fund should be allocated and funneled so no administration will take advantage of its use. Arroyo had issued Executive Order 828 in 2009, authorizing the President to expand the use of this special account even in non-energy related projects, without the legislative's jurisdiction, making it, as critics would say, a huge pork barrel for the President. Arroyo herself accessed this fund. She allotted 2 billion pesos to address the rice insufficiency and 900 million for the farmers stricken by 2 consecutive typhoons. The farmers, however, cried that they received nothing from this fund. The House of Representatives have written bills that seek to use the Malampaya funds for the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines. Just recently, Duterte released a statement on how he would give this money if it follows the what is constituted to the local government units of Palawan instead. All these lay claims on the money raise the question, how did the government spend this money since its launch in the 1998? That is 2 decades of billions of dollars of money. And since there has been no huge undertaking of the explorations and research in search of how we can make the cost of electricity cheaper and cleaner, really, we expect that the 2 decades of Malampaya Fund to be intact. The Bureau of Treasury assures that it does remain intact, but this brings more question. Why is it not being used by the government? Former Budget and Management Secretary Florencio Abad clarified that the Malampaya Fund and the $1 billion expected to be in it is not an actual cash but rather an accounting of revenue inflows and expenditure items charged against the fund since we started earning from it in 2002. He said that the net proceeds actually goes as a part of the yearly revenue program that supports the budget proposal submitted by the Congress. Rest assured, he said, that the fund is used strategically because it is the Congress that decides on it. Senator Sherwin T. Gatchalian recently proposed plans to take $25 billion off the Malampaya Fund in one blow to fund 100% rural electrification. Duterte, however, recently said in one of his speeches in the island province of Palawan that he'll give the remaining back to Palawan because it's rightfully theirs. With an approximate $72 billion, he said, Palawan will be the richest province in the country, and he asked, what will you do with that much money? And the same question should run through your mind. What should we do with that much money? In conclusion, through the EITI platform, we were able to take a look at how much money the government gets from the extractive sector and each of the industries under it. Through EITI's first step, we were able to understand how the government gains from the oil and gas operations. We now understand that it is the Department of Energy and Bureau of Internal Revenue that oversees the taxation process and that it goes into a special fund under the Bureau of Treasury. The Malampaya Fund, along with other funds from other oil and gas operations, will be used to fund future energy-related projects, but it can also be accessed by the President as an emergency fund or to however he deems it should be used. So, for the second step, we now know which agencies we can get the data and the accounts from. The Department of Energy and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. In here, we found out that for the year 2014, both agencies together collected 74,841,508,684 pesos. We also found out that the corporate tax of the oil and gas industry makes up 87% of the total corporate tax of the whole extractive sector. We also found out that the Malampaya operation is 38% of DOE's or Department of Energy's total collection. By the third step, we found out that the money cashed out by the corporations reconciled with the digits remitted to each agency. The few differences are accounted immaterial, not in cash form, but was received nonetheless. With that, we conclude that the problem with the Malampaya Fund is not the fault of the corporations. In fact, they do pay their tax dutifully, and as remarked by EITI, they pass their documents within the deadline. The problem really is in the allocation of the money because of the overlapping decrees made by several presidents pertaining to it. The Malampaya operation is set to continue until 2030 with allowable extension. We ought to earn billions of dollars more from this operation, so if the constitutionality of how it shall be allocated won't be immediately fixed, the Malampaya Fund is bound to be in more controversies and scandals of corruption.